Welcome to our first Fabian Women's Book Club. We're delighted to have author and comedian Rebecca Reid with us. I've just got my voice rather than my picture because I'm in a car, but I'm Kelly from the Fabian Women's Network exec, and I'm running this event with Amy. Amy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm the Northwest Women's Officer for the Young Fabians.
So we decided, Amy, myself and Emily, who's not sadly can't be here with us tonight, that we wanted to talk about Rebecca's book because it resonated. I read it first. It resonated with me really a lot in terms of how we see rudeness, and particularly rudeness in women. So when I saw the title, I think showed up on my recommended books, I ordered it, read it really quickly, and then I was like, I've got to talk to other women about this book. So Rebecca, it's probably helpful if we go to you and you just tell us why you wrote the book.
So yeah, I wrote The Power of Rude last year following an incident which is in the book. But basically I do quite a lot of, or I used to do quite a lot of, but when we used to talk about things that weren't corona, I used to do a lot of breakfast telly, which would basically be me turning up, getting my hair and makeup done, going on for like 4.5 minutes and having a big row with somebody else who would have the opposite opinion to me. And it was, it's a good living. I was very privileged to be allowed to do it. And then there was one day when I did a segment on Good Morning Britain with a comedian, and Piers Morgan was running the discussion, which if you've ever watched Good Morning Britain, you'll know it's very hard to get a word in edgeways. So eventually it's my turn to speak, and I say about, I don't know, I'm not sure how many words, but it wasn't very many. And then the comedian who I was debating with jumps in and starts talking over me. And I, without thinking about it, I'm so frustrated because he's been winding me up a bit before we were on set as well. I just lean forward and I go shh like that with my finger in front of my lips. And I say something along the lines of, you can keep talking and I'll keep talking, or you can stop talking and I'll keep talking, but I'm not going to stop talking. So then afterwards, the Daily Mail dubbed me Rebecca Rude, which is, it's a relatively obvious pun. And usually they just describe me as woman, so it was actually quite fortunate to have a name for once. But I was really upset about it at the time. I was mortified because I'm not rude, I'm lovely, I'm very sweet, I'm nice. And then the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, actually, I am rude sometimes and it works really well. And there are a lot of situations where I haven't been rude and it served me really badly. So maybe I need to completely re-evaluate how I think about rudeness. So I started actively doing that within my own life. And then I was having drinks with my sister and I was telling her about this and she was like, this is a book. And I'd been writing fiction for a couple of years at that point, which I still love and I still do. But this felt like such a really great moment to do my first nonfiction, because it's a philosophy that I genuinely believe in and that really has made my life easier and better. And what I love about it as a concept is that I say it costs nothing. The book is $13.99, but you wouldn't need to buy the book, even though I'd like you to buy the book. The basic premise of being more assertive and not being afraid of being rude. A couple of sentences, didn't cost you any money, and it is genuinely life-changing.
Brilliant. So Amy, you've got the questions, haven't you, that we've got? That have come from our friend Emily. Could you ask them for me, please, Amy?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, you're often on interviews with usually quite ignorant, sexist people, we'll say. What is it like? Do you get frustrated, that you're put specifically against someone who has the opposite kind of mindset and beliefs to you? How does that make you feel?
So I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I'm torn between feeling that I do deeply respect that these shows always try to achieve balance. And you wouldn't be able to have somebody like me on breakfast TV unless you had somebody with the opposite opinion. So sometimes I feel a bit conflicted about going on television with people who I really strongly disagree with. But actually, I know that ultimately those people are going to get to say what they think anyway. So it's better to have somebody like me there saying, oh, actually, sorry, not sure that's right. But yeah, I do absolutely get frustrated. I get frustrated when I read the comments on articles that I've written. I get frustrated when people tweet me saying that the fact that they don't think I'm attractive means I shouldn't be able to talk. it's a very, very frustrating job to be in. And I do less journalism now than I once did, and I write more about culture and less about my own life, because there comes a point where you just it becomes so painful having every single aspect of your character and body and face critiqued that you do lose. I think it's a young woman's game basically, and I'm about to be 30 and I have slightly tapped out of the extreme end of the trenches because I just can't do it anymore. It's too hard.
I guess that's something that puts women off entering so many different walks of life that are in like the public sphere. So how do you kind of deal with that side of it, you know, the kind of online abuse? How do you deal with that?
So for the bulk of my career, for about 5 years, it was very manageable, and I found it was hard but bearable, and I got a lot out of it, and I really enjoyed it, and I made a really good name for myself. And then as it got worse, and it's difficult to measure because websites like Twitter and Facebook are doing better with mitigating online abuse, but they're not knocking it out the park. But as their controls have got better, I think the climate on the internet's got worse. So the experience has remained the same. As one goes up and one goes down, they say, so in the middle. So ultimately, I put up with it for as long as it felt like it was the right thing for me. And then I sort of questioned why I was still putting myself in that line of fire. And I realised that I wasn't maybe doing it for the right reasons. So now I just do an assessment about how much do I want this? How much will this benefit me? And part of it, I think, learning as a woman in general, learning to say no to good opportunities, like inverted commas, is a really powerful step. And I think it's very easy to feel that, especially if you work in a competitive career, that say the only way to work is to say yes to everything. And actually, that's not true. Saying yes to the right opportunities and saying no to the wrong opportunities is really important.
Yeah, and that's a really important point that I think I touch on quite a few times in your book as well, that women don't put themselves first enough, and that however Reid is almost kind of doing that, but not in like a selfish way, but in more like a self-preservation kind of way.
Yeah, ultimately, I think the power of rude is not actually about being rude. It's about not being afraid of being rude. Very, very few of the things that I condone doing are ill-mannered or impolite, but they are things that may be considered rude because women are doing them. And you know, I don't think it'll come as news to anybody that there are a lot of double standards in terms of behaviour. And even though we do genuinely do better now than we once did, it's still incredibly common for women who are assertive and direct to be considered rude or bolshy, and I have a list in the book of all the words that are only ever applied to women, and it's still an incredibly long list, and I still hear most of those words at least once a day.
Yeah, it is. It's like it's getting better slowly, but there's still a huge list of words that you'd only ever refer to women as, you wouldn't refer to men.
Absolutely.
Literally. So why do you think it is so bad for a woman to be considered rude in comparison to men?
So primarily women's benefit is to be something that reacts to things rather than we're not supposed to do anything, we're supposed to react to things. We're not supposed to want anything, we're supposed to be wanted. We are supposed to be a very passive, still thing for other people to move around, for men to move around. So as soon as a woman rejects that, you're rejecting a system that has worked quite well functionally for quite a lot of people for a very, very long time. And I don't love being like, it's the patriarchy, but ultimately it kind of is the patriarchy. There is still a lot of benefit in women being polite, quiet, passive, subservient, and willing to do as other people want them to do. Because that, you know, our whole working week is structured on the basis that one person takes care of children and one person is in the workplace, and we don't question very many of these things. We just accept the fact that we're going to spend half our salaries on childcare and we're going to be exhausted, and these kinds of structures only work if women accept them. If women say, as for instance the Women's Equality Party would encourage, actually, sorry, all the domestic work that I do is work, I would like to be paid for that, I'd like to have that recognised, the whole thing falls down. So I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but it's not really a conspiracy theory to say that if women started being rude universally, society would crumble and we would have to redo everything. And it would be a good thing, but it would be hard as well. So I can see why there are people who are very threatened by it.
Yeah, definitely. It's like that whole thing, isn't it, where if women if there wasn't this repression of women, and women were more assertive and proud of how they looked and didn't feel like can't think of it, like being pushed down all the time for how they look and the way they present themselves, like so many industries and companies just wouldn't exist. Which is
the amount of money that is generated by us feeling bad about ourselves, and I say this as somebody who pays £120 a month for a gym, I have Botox, like I am fully part of this problem, but the amount of money that people make out of me feeling bad about myself is a lot, like a lot. And yeah, those industries would crumble if we refuse to play ball. Unfortunately, it's so deeply bred into us that it's very difficult to say I'm going to be the one person who doesn't care about her hair, skin, teeth, whatever. I really admire women who are like that, but I also completely understand women like me who aren't.
Exactly, it's hideous at the minute the way it is. So your book discusses the phrase "boys will be boys," which a lot of us hate. How can we like collectively dismantle this idea, you know, that boys shouldn't be held accountable for their actions? Essentially, how do we challenge this?
So I think it's a lot easier to challenge it when we're talking about little boys pulling hair or biting in the playground than it is when we're talking about men in their 50s and 60s abusing positions of power. And I think the older you get and the higher the stakes are, the more complicated it is to deal with. So when we deal with it in terms of small children, we're not really apportioning blame when a little boy pushes a little girl over. We're not saying he's bad, he's broken, send him out of school, send him to live in the mountains. We're saying you can't do that, and that's not okay just because you've got a lot of energy. Also, there's a lot of research to suggest that actually boys and girls aren't particularly biologically different when they're small, and a lot of our perception of that boys as rambunctious and girls as sweet is genuinely down to our perception. And similarly with toys, you know, lots of little girls love dolls, but also lots of little boys do, and it's obviously we're not raising children in vacuums, so it's very difficult to know what is natural and what is learned. But ultimately, yeah, I would say it's about starting as early as possible. And I think particularly, my friends are starting to have children. I live in London where people tend to have kids later, but I'm coming up for 30, so people are starting to do the baby thing now. And I do believe, honestly, some of it will get better naturally, because I so much more rarely now hear boys will be boys about children than I did 10 years ago when I was a nanny. So I do really believe that people are doing better in terms of not raising their children on the basis of gender.
Yeah, and I think obviously it all starts from when you're young. If you're brought up thinking that like it's that whole idea, isn't it, of boys are nasty and horrible to the girls that they like. So, and you mentioned that in the book, so like girls are then thinking that like violence towards them or abuse is normal, which is so...
It's extraordinary, isn't it, when you come home and you say like, oh, a boy pushed me over, and somebody, not my mother, who was very enlightened, but somebody was like, oh, he's got a crush on you. I said, okay, if he does have a crush on me, why has nobody took him aside and said, why has nobody taken him aside and said that is not how you express affection for people? It's a very, very strange thing that we allowed that to continue, because there's not even any logic in it. It's not even a good bad theory.
No, it's so weird. I guess like even though you hear it less about sort of more middle-aged men as well, you don't hear it's locker room talk or whatever. You don't hear that as much anymore. But do you think perceptions are changing as much, or is it just that they can't use that as an excuse anymore?
It's very difficult to know, because I think the expression echo chambers tends to be used by people I don't particularly enjoy, but there is a genuine problem that a lot of us do very badly in terms of getting out of our own bubbles. So I think things are getting a lot better, but then I spend time with women in their 20s and 30s who are predominantly feminists, so of course I think it's getting better. I don't know whether when 35-year-old old Etonians are on a grouse shooting trip, they are less likely to talk about who wants to do what to their PA. I have no idea whether it's better there, but I think if at least the public face of it changes, I can't make people behave differently in private, and I do really believe people should be allowed to behave kind of how they want to in private to an extent. Publicly, we are holding people to account, and that's got to be something. And maybe longer term, those behaviours will change genuinely. What I would say is that I've noticed that the men I know who are very ambitious in terms of politics and academia and all that kind of stuff are hyper aware that they cannot behave in certain ways. Now, whether that's because they want to be good people or because they want to be successful, in terms of the outcome, doesn't really matter to me. I think it's probably because they don't want to get caught and get in trouble, but still, if that means they behave better, that is a step in the right direction.
What I would say to that, though, sorry, Amy, what I would say is if you look at Boris Johnson and Donald Trump, is they're both incredibly rude individuals, both very rude, very offensive. I can't imagine any woman that behaved like either of them would ever have been elected. And it's really interesting how often you hear people talking about how rude Hillary Clinton is, which, we could discuss. But in comparison to Donald Trump or Theresa May in comparison to Boris Johnson, so I find it staggering and really concerning that both of them have been elected leaders in countries.
Also, I think the thing that I find most bothering is the moral standard is so different. A woman who had, let me get this right, is it 5 children by 3 different women? Sorry, but so Donald Trump has 5 children by 3 women. The idea that a woman could get elected if she had 5 children by 3 different men, the amount of time that people spend lambasting Katie Price for having had multiple children by multiple men, she couldn't even get a job on reality TV anymore, and as a man you can be the president. We don't even know how many children our prime minister has. That is bonkers. It's physically impossible that a female politician could have got away with that, because you can't have a secret pregnancy as a woman unless you work really hard at it. So the standards are completely different, and it is exhausting. But I think Boris Johnson, has tried to say fewer awful things since he's been in power. I don't think he thinks fewer awful things, but I think he's tried to say them in this.
It's horrible, the gap, isn't it? Like, Hillary Clinton was held to account so much for her husband's actions, nothing to do with her. And
the thing that I found particularly upsetting about that was that she was held accountable in the sense of, he did a bad thing, therefore you're a bad person, which is one thing. There was also so much she couldn't even keep her husband interested, like she had failed sexually, and I just remember thinking, what? How is that relevant? And yet but people really, I mean, I liked Hillary Clinton. I thought she was a really compelling candidate, but people really hated her. Like, people like you and I, like liberal, interesting, nice feminist people still hated her, which is a very complicated thing to unpick.
Yeah, it was very much like, why on earth would she let her husband cheat?
Yeah. Well, I don't think many people let it. I think
No.
And also in a long marriage, that is sometimes what happens.
Yeah, it's really, the whole moral thing it seems to be an issue everywhere. I think we just see it a lot more in America. Obviously we've seen it with Boris Johnson, but we have candidates that have been accused of like sexual assault, like the president has been accused of sexual assault by numerous women. Like, how is that okay? But
yeah, and I think the gap where I see it particularly is that a white woman wouldn't get away with this stuff, but a black woman wouldn't even be allowed in the same postcode as this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's something that I've tried really hard to educate myself better about recently, for obvious reasons. Is that I spent a lot of time thinking about how much harder things are for me as a woman, which is true. But then I have to think, okay, so now make it 5 times harder and you're a woman of colour, and then make it 50 times harder and you're a woman of colour with children.
Sorry,
I think back to the sexual thing as well. I think you raised this book really well in the Amy's phrase, and you raised this really well in the book, Rebecca, is the kind of responsibility that's put on women not to be rude to men that are harassing them. And I can certainly think when I was younger, when I used to go to nightclubs and men would sort of push you into corners and so on, and the kind of responsibility to let them down gently when they're very clearly harassing you. And I can remember moving rings onto my engagement finger and things like that, and I'd try and assess it. Why didn't I swear at those men and tell them to get lost or go away or whatever? But often it just seemed much easier to go and get a boy who I knew to stand next to me. And when I unpick that's crazy, but that's what I did.
I in the book I talk about the feeling of danger that can come from letting down men, and that's definitely a real thing. But in my case, when I, told a man in Iron Apple or a bar in Leicester Square that I was gay or that I had a boyfriend, it wasn't because I was scared, it's because I didn't want to hurt their feelings. And where does that come from, the idea that somebody deserves to have their feelings protected more than I deserve to say thanks but not tonight? That is a really and I think it is women are genuinely taught to think of themselves last, emotionally, physically, sexually, on every level. But I think it's very notable in that instance.
Yeah, I think it's either one or the other, isn't it? It's either trying to protect their feelings or it is for a sense of fear. Like,
yeah, I think it can be either. And I think different women, like with me, it was always the fear of hurting feelings, but I've also got friends, particularly who've had guys be really, really aggressive to them on nights out, for whom that fear will not, and chances are most men won't do that. But if it happens to you once, it's very hard to kind of dissolve that from your consciousness.
Yeah, definitely. I remember when I was 16, we were on a school trip in Poland, in like the hotel, and someone came up to me, a group of friends, and started asking for sexual favors, and 3 of them said straight away, "No, I have a boyfriend," just because they were petrified. And it's like men respect other men's like property.
Because you belong to somebody else. There's a sticky label saying property of Paul or John or whoever,
more
and therefore
the woman's right to say no. It's so
And there's a really interesting sort of moral quandary about the more that we do that, the more it becomes expected to do that. Yeah. Because a man is more likely to react badly if he's never heard no thank you rather than I've got a boyfriend. But it's a lot of expectation to put on people to say no, you have to be honest, because otherwise you're making it worse for other women. And I find it frustrating when women are held responsible for fixing things that they didn't break.
Yeah. And I mean, one thing that really kind of scared me in the book was the survey that you talk about from 2018 that said that 1/4 of men didn't think that non-consensual sex in marriage was rape.
Yeah, I was very shocked by that. But then it was only I can't remember the date off the top of my head, but it was either the late 80s or early 90s when rape became illegal in marriage. Previous to that, you could have sex with your wife whether she was conscious or consenting, and that was just the case. And I think those attitudes take a long time to change. And I also think not to be kind of hashtag all lives matter, but it does go both ways, because I think couples forget about consent in marriage, full stop. I think it becomes an assumed thing that you can touch your partner whenever you want, that you can do whatever you want. And I think it's a strain, but no one ever talks to you, because by the time you get married, you're grown up, so nobody's there to give you any advice or sex education. They just assume that you're finished and done.
Yeah, no, that's true. I wanted to talk to you about kind of perceptions around the gender gap, because I remember I was talking to a boy sort of a few years ago, and he actually convinced me that the gender gap wasn't real.
Oh, they love doing that. It's their favorite thing. It's the number one thing at a dinner party. I'll sit down. They'll put me next. This happens a lot. They'll put me next to somebody because he likes a debate, and I'll be like, "Well, I do that all day. If I were a chef, would you have asked me to cook?" But they put me next to some guy who's like, "So you're a feminist?" Well, I mean, the pay gap's not real, and it's exhausting because they are right and they're wrong. It is illegal to pay 2 people a different amount of money for doing the same job, but it's not illegal to hire 2 people on the same salary and then give one of them a pay rise and not the other. And it's not illegal to pay women less because they work part-time because they're doing all of the childcare, while their male partner works full-time doing no childcare, works fewer hours a week and gets paid twice as much. So the gender pay gap is a very complicated thing that a lot of men on Reddit have chosen to willfully misunderstand and then really enjoy shouting at women about. But the pay gap is very much real, but it is predominantly worse between women who have children, and the biggest gap you've got is men who have children and women who don't have children. Sorry, men who have children and women who have children are the furthest ends of it. If you then add in race, if you take a white man with no children, a white man who has children and a black woman who has children, that's about as far as you can get. So it does absolutely exist, but I think arguably about more than just gender. Ethnicity does really play into it as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think
There's also, sorry, I was going to say, there's a myth that it's because women don't ask for pay rises, which is quite widely debunked. Women do ask for pay rises. They are arguably more nervous about it, but they do so. They are more likely to be penalised for it internally, so to either not get the pay rise and then, insult to injury, to be considered ungrateful and passed over for future promotions as a result of having asked for more money. And when a woman, and attitude surveys show that when women have children, even if they're doing the same amount of work, they're regarded to be less dedicated, and men who are doing the same amount of work are regarded as being more dedicated.
it's so disappointing. Sorry about that, you can hear my dog barking in the
Oh,
background.
that's nice though. Yeah, it's so depressing. It's so depressing.
I literally walked out of that room when I was talking to this boy and walked into my housemate's room and I was like, gender pay gap. And then she was like, are you for real? And then I was like, right, okay, yeah, completely. I've just been brainwashed for like half an hour.
The problem is, like with so much of this stuff, there are grains of truth in it. I very much doubt that if there's a man working in the same job as you exactly, that he's actually being paid. Because the Reddit argument is always, if women were cheaper to hire, then why wouldn't companies only hire women? But that's not how it works. It's about your career progression. It's about how much you're able to work over the course of your lifetime. It's about the fact that the domestic labor that you will do, and women do 60% more unpaid labor, which I can't remember exactly how many hours that works out to, but women do about between 8 and 12 hours more housework a week than men. So men do like 6 and women do like 18, and that's unpaid completely, but it's still work. Being a stay-at-home mother is still work. Doing part-time because you're looking after your kid is still work. Cleaning the house is still work. And sorry, I'm going on about this, but I would just conclude by saying that when you have children or get married or buy a house, you're encouraged to get life insurance. And if you have a stay-at-home partner and children, you're encouraged to work out their life insurance by working out how much it would cost to replace them. So if you had to have somebody who would do childcare and cleaning and pick up and homework and bedtimes, and also somebody will have sex with you, you are looking at about £150,000 a year. And I don't think there are many stay-at-home parents who are being given that in actual cash.
No. And it's the idea that as well women feel guilty. So if they're, for example, working part-time and then taking care of the kids and the housework and everything else, and then they'll, even if they're like in pain or struggling or whatever, they'll still make sure that, you know, the house is spotless and the food is ready for like their husband, because they'll feel guilty because the husbands work full-time.
Yeah, and another thing that you'll notice is that let's say that your partner works full, let's assume it's a heterosexual couple, so let's say the man works full-time and the woman doesn't work, is a stay-at-home parent or is on maternity leave. When your partner gets home from work, in theory, the child rearing hours outside of a 37.5-hour working week should be split, because otherwise you are working 24 hours a day and your partner is working 9 hours a day. What happens in reality for the vast majority of relationships is that the female party does childcare Monday through Friday, 24 hours a day, and the working partner does 39 hours a week, and then comes home and then is able to have a shower and eat dinner and watch some telly, might do a little bit of a cuddle before bed, and oh, they're so good, they're doing so well. They're just being a parent, it's their child too. Mm-hmm. So I think one of the things that we could really stand to improve is being a bit more direct about the division of labour. So if you are planning on having a child with somebody, saying, so what about if I do the feeds from 9 p.m. through to 3 a.m. and then you can do 3 a.m. through to 6 a.m. or whatever, because it's not reasonable for me to be working 24 hours a day.
Yeah, I guess I think it's about making women feel that they can actually say that it's not rude to say that.
And I think also, like, I've seen friends of mine turn around and say that to a partner, and the partner's been like, oh yeah, actually, when you point that out, that does make sense, let's do it that way. It's not that they're bad people, it's that it hadn't occurred to them, and you end up with the situation where one of you is afraid to be rude, so says nothing, and the other one doesn't think about it, because why would they? And you're then depriving yourself. And a lot of what I write about in the book is that some of these things aren't because men are bad and evil, it's because they're just not thinking about it, and a lot of men will very happily behave in a different way if you ask them to. The fear of asking is the real problem here.
Yeah, and I guess kind of like what can sort of politicians do to kind of change this patriarchy? You know, what kind of policies would help, do you think?
I mean, I think it would take an enormous overhaul. I think the things that would make the major thing that would make a really big difference would either be free childcare for everyone, or being paid for domestic labour. Those are really, I mean, being paid for domestic labour is very pie in the sky. I don't think it'll ever happen, but it would be amazing. More free childcare, better free childcare from earlier would make an enormous difference to a lot of women's lives. And then I think otherwise, everyone always says we should teach it in schools about everything. But I do think that teaching assertiveness in schools could be something really useful. And, you know, within the kind of general studies-y space, it seems like there should be a space for assertiveness. And then otherwise, in terms of policy, it's very difficult because I'm naturally quite sort of low interventionist. I kind of want people to do these things for themselves rather than somebody else deciding it for them. But I do think pay transparency is probably one of the other main places, because I just can't see who it negatively affects apart from employers. I think being able to, and I think it should be illegal to penalise somebody for asking what somebody else in their company gets paid. And I've worked in companies previously where salary sharing has resulted in disciplinary action, or at least serious talkings to, and that feels so wrong. And that would really, the pay gap thing could be sorted out quite quickly if everybody knows, if you're all paid in bands and you know what band everybody's in. That would be like really quite an easy fix, but people don't want to do it because the privacy of some faceless corporate entity is more important than people.
I think that's the thing that like it doesn't actually hurt anyone, that policy, obviously, except for employees if they are paying unfairly.
People talk about, well, it's private what you get paid, and I just think, well, why is it private? Because if you're working Sainsbury's, like when I used to work in cost cutters, I knew who was making £6.33 an hour, and I knew who was making £4.33 an hour. And we know what minimum wage is, we know what London living wage is. So it's funny that at the lower end of the pay scale, apparently you don't need privacy, but at the higher end of the pay scale, you do need privacy. Figure me that.
It's bizarre.
I think it's a little bit off the subject, but I think thinking of other things you write in the book, a lot of privacy is sort of another word often for politeness, in a sense that there's a lot of things we keep private for other people's feelings. And I'm sort of thinking about Chrissy, is her name Chrissy Teigen?
Chrissy Teigen, yeah.
Kind of reaction she had to her
and people, the fact that she, in case anybody hasn't seen it, she had so it's very normal, particularly in America, to have a photographer in the delivery room with you taking pictures of you when you give birth, and when she gave birth to her son, who was stillborn, Jack, she chose to have a photographer in the room, or sorry, she had her mum and her husband John Legend take pictures, and people were vile about it. Calling her an attention seeker, saying, and even people who were sort of like, oh, I'm really sorry that your baby died, but why have you done this? I was like, well, you're not that sorry then, are you? Taking time out of your day to shame her for processing her grief in a way that feels comfortable. And miscarriages, I had a miscarriage last year, and it's one of those things that secrecy, you're absolutely right, secrecy/privacy is something that you're told is there for you. So you're told not to tell anybody you're pregnant until 12 weeks. And the myth is that that's to protect you. It's not. It's to protect other people from the discomfort of having to hear, I had a miscarriage. Because people are terrible about talking about gynecology and terrible about talking about grief. If you put the two things together, it's just a disaster. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I'm a naturally very anti, and I don't like the expectation of privacy. I think we should probably all talk about more things more often. But yeah, in the case of anything kind of health related, I think the pressure to be private is actually the pressure to conform and to say nothing.
Well, it's kind of a borrowed, isn't it? That you know, if you're having any gynecology kind of work done, you say, "Oh, I've got women's problems," so we can put it all under the carpet. And I think actually, in the case of men, it costs a lot of lives that men are discouraged also from talking about health, so they pretend there's nothing wrong. You know, until it's too late, as we know with men's cancers and things. I just want to thank you for what you said about miscarriage in the book, Rebecca. I thought it was really important and really useful, and I think it would have helped a lot of people that have read that part.
Yeah, honestly, it helped me. The fact that I could talk about it non-stop professionally, in some instances I could get paid to talk about it, was the greatest privilege of my life, because most people who don't work in the tiny little industry that I inhabit don't get to do that. They have to go back to a real job, and they can only talk about it if their colleagues are willing to have that conversation. Whereas I was able to spend days and days pouring my pain out, and I was effectively sort of screaming through my words, and it was a real luxury to be able to do that. And I would like more women to have the options. There will always be women who want to keep it private, and they will always have that right to. They must always have that right to. But I would really like more women to be able to go into work and say, I had a miscarriage, rather than I'm not well. Because you need to talk about it. It's the same as any other loss. You need to talk about it. You need to be able to talk about it if you want to.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's like the fear of offending, isn't it? You don't want to tell someone that you're upset or what the real problem is, because you're worried about how they're feeling and not how you're feeling.
And I think there's a real something that I go into in the book is about how to tell people if you're not able or willing to listen to their problems. And the flip side of being more able to say, I had a miscarriage, or my friend died, or I got fired, or whatever, is that the people in your life have to be able to say, I am so sorry that happened to you. I can't really talk to you about that right now. Or I can't support you in that right now. And that's very American, which we all get very itchy about. And it's very feelings oriented, which we're terrible about. But I do think it is kind of essential to be able to say, and I think if you are going to be somebody like me who talks about their life and their feelings a lot, you have to be accepting when people say, I can't take this on right now.
Yeah, and I think, I know going back to the issue of miscarriage, but I was really, really shocked to find that miscarriage leave wasn't a thing.
Nope, your doctor is completely, well, in my case, and in a lot of cases, your employer will say, take the time that you need. But that again is the luxury of somebody. At the time I was working for a magazine, actually I hadn't started at the time I was working for the Metro Online, who were incredible. And basically I was freelance, but they just said, like, tell us when you're ready to come back. But if I were working on a 0 hours contract, if I were working for a bigger corporation where I don't have a personal relationship with an editor, but I just have a line manager who I don't really know, I would have had absolutely no rights. My doctor could have signed me off, but that would be my doctor's discretion. So they could, and it's supposed to be based on your physical ability to work, not really your emotional ability to work. So I could, there will be women being sent back to work within 24, 48 hours of a miscarriage all over the UK. And they'll have no recourse to do anything else, which is, it's genuinely shocking.
It's awful. So I guess, like, a really, really important issue is, how can we sort of enable men to understand the fear that women experience? Because you talk about the fear of, running at night or texting your friends to make sure you got home okay, putting your keys between your fingers. How can we make men aware of that? Because I just feel like at the minute there's like a real sense of, oh, like, it's sorted now, feminism, that's been and gone, like,
we fixed it.
I
think there is an element of that, and I also think that unfortunately there's only so much room in the public consciousness for any one problem at a time. And at the moment we're talking about racism, which is a very important conversation that I would not take any airtime away from. But it does sadden me that that's the thing that we can talk about. And around sort of 2016, 17, it was Me Too. And that was the social issue that we cared about. And in the middle, it was sort of the environment. But there have been social movements that people are willing to talk about at any one time, and they change. And it's really, really, really hard that we weren't finished with feminism, but it's no longer, it's a lot hard. You can't really get on television to talk about it anymore. People don't want to commission articles about it anymore. It's not a central concern anymore. And that is also, it's how fashion works. It's how trends in film and television work. It is how the human psychology works. We get bored of things and we move on to other things. And it will cycle back. It will come again. But in the meantime, because we can't force people to want to read about it, we have to take the fight to the streets, and we have to take it to our own lives, and we have to make it small, which is how you make it big in the long run. So it's talking to your friends, it's pulling people up on things they say, it's calling out little comments at a dinner party or at the pub, not in a nasty way, again, not in the you're a bad person, get out, you're cancelled, but in a, can you explain to me why that's funny, because I don't get that. Or what if when I've heard somebody saying that somebody's a slut, I will very often be like, what is a slut? what does that mean? And actually, the second you ask somebody to explain what a slut is, the whole thing comes crashing down. It's like, well, oh, it's just somebody who likes sex. Okay, and please continue. Why is that a problem? And asking people to question themselves on a small personal level without being angry and without declaring them a moral failure is the way to do it. And I do think that cancel culture needs a revamp, because I understand that it's an important tool for people to hold power to account. But in reality, what it's come up with is people with 700 followers on Instagram being told that they should go burn. And that's not a productive system. I think this sounds very century, which is not my natural métier, but there's a real space for talking to people you don't agree with, listening to them, accepting that you could be wrong, even though you're almost certainly not, hearing them out, and then putting your feelings across. But I think it's having those conversations, because I think there is a genuine problem. This isn't an original thought, everyone said this before, but I think there is a genuine problem with, I only talk to people who already agree with me, so that's pointless. I can sit around talking about the importance of abortion with my friends who also believe in the importance of abortion, but at the end of the day we've achieved nothing. If I go and I talk to somebody I went to school with who is anti-choice, I might make a difference there.
Yeah, I think that's really important. People might not want to have those conversations. They might not want to sort of entertain, if they're so passionate about it, like something so important like pro-choice, they might not want to hear the other side. But I think it's really important that we do, because otherwise it's going to stay so polarized and there'll never be a consensus, which is what we need, really.
And I think we've lost the ability, and I am terrible for this, we've lost the ability to say it's possible that you could be pro-life, anti-choice, and still a good person. Now, that's a really bitter pill for me to swallow, because it's being pro-choice is one of the most core values in my soul. But I have to accept that somebody else not thinking that doesn't inherently mean they're evil. And also I have to accept that if I sit down and I talk to them and they start to understand that I'm not evil and I do believe in reproductive freedom, they might change their mind, not through me shouting, you're evil, you're wrong, not even by me shouting, what about rape and incest? Just by them getting to see that I'm still there, we still have communication, I still believe something else different from them. And I think that's where real change comes. But I think also the time for polite silence is over. The time for letting your, racist uncle use the N-word over the dinner table, that's dead. It's having the fight, but just having it, I guess, nicely, which is ironic because I'm very pro being rude.
Yeah, exactly.